The crushing defeat the stars themselves seemed to weep as Captain Sarah Chun watched the last of her battleships explode in brilliant flashes of light. From the bridge of the UES Defiance, she could see the wreckage of humanity's once proud fleet drifting through space like metallic snow. The Zephyrian Empire had struck fast and hard, their crystal-hulled vessels cutting through human defenses like knives through paper. "Ma'am, we're receiving surrender demands from the Zephyrian flagship," reported communications officer Torres, her voice barely steady. The young woman's hands trembled as she worked her console, trying to maintain some semblance of professional composure while their world crumbled around them. Captain Chin stood tall despite the chaos, her weathered face showing the strain of 3 days of constant battle. At 45, she had served in the human colonial fleet for over 2 decades, but nothing had prepared her for this level of devastation. The Zephyrians had appeared without warning, their massive armada emerging from hyperspace like a plague of locusts. "Tell them we'll consider their terms," Chin replied, buying time while her mind raced through options. Behind her, the bridge crew worked frantically to coordinate the evacuation of New Terra, the last major human colony still holding out against the alien assault. The Zephyrians were unlike any enemy humanity had faced before. Their empire spanned dozens of star systems, built on the conquest of lesser species. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with crystalline skin that reflected light in mesmerizing patterns. Their technology was centuries ahead of human development, powered by exotic energy sources that human scientists barely understood. Admiral Kextar, the Zephyrian fleet commander, had made their intentions clear from the beginning. Humanity would serve as slave labor in their expanding empire, or they would be exterminated. There was no middle ground, no room for negotiation. The Zephyrians viewed humans as they viewed all other species they encountered, resources to be exploited or obstacles to be removed. "Captain, I'm detecting massive energy signatures from the Zephyrian formation," called out Lieutenant Jake Morrison from the sensor station. The 26-year-old pilot had been reassigned to bridge duty after his fighter squadron was decimated in the first wave of attacks. His youthful face was pale, with exhaustion, but his eyes still held the determination that had made him one of humanity's best pilots. Chin moved to the tactical display, watching as the enemy fleet reorganized for what appeared to be a final assault. The Zephyrians had learned to respect human tenacity over the past 3 days, but their overwhelming technological advantage was finally proving decisive. Human plasma cannons barely scratched their energy shields, while their crystal beam weapons could slice through human armor like it was made of tissue paper. "Dr. Webb, report to the bridge." Immediately, Chin ordered through the ship's communication system. If anyone could find a way out of this nightmare, it would be the brilliant scientist who had been working on classified projects for the past 2 years. Dr. Marcus Webb arrived within minutes, his usually neat appearance disheveled from working around the clock in his laboratory. At 53, he was one of humanity's leading theoretical physicists, but more importantly, he was a man who never accepted defeat. His dark eyes held an intensity that had carried him through countless impossible problems. "The situation is worse than we thought," Webb said without preamble as he joined Chin at the tactical display. "The Zephyrians aren't just attacking our military targets. They're systematically destroying our industrial infrastructure, our research facilities, our educational institutions. They're trying to cripple our ability to resist permanently." Chin nodded grimly. The reports had been coming in for hours. Universities bombed, factories vaporized, research stations turned to space dust. The Zephyrians weren't just conquering humanity, they were trying to break their spirit entirely. However, Webb continued, lowering his voice so only Chin could hear, "This might actually work in our favor. They're so focused on destroying our current capabilities that they're not looking for what we've been hiding." Before Chin could ask what he meant, the ship's alarms began blaring. On the main screen, the Zephyrian flagship, a massive crystalline structure that dwarfed even the largest human vessels, was moving into position for what appeared to be a final bombardment. Incoming transmission from Admiral Kextar, Torres announced, her voice tight with fear. "Put it through," Chen ordered, straightening her uniform and preparing to face the enemy commander. The screen filled with the imposing figure of Admiral Kextar, his crystalline features reflecting the light of his ship's bridge in dazzling patterns. When he spoke, his voice carried the absolute authority of a being who had crushed dozens of civilizations. Captain Chun of the human fleet, Kextar began, his words translated by the ship's computers into perfect English. Your resistance has been admirable but futile. Your species fought with courage, but courage cannot overcome the inevitable. You have lost. Chen met his gaze steadily. We're still here, Admiral. Still fighting. Kextar's expression might have been amusement. It was hard to tell with his alien features. Look around you, human. Your fleets are destroyed. Your colonies burn. Your people flee in terror. You have no weapons that can harm us, no strategies that can defeat us. Your civilization is ending. What are your terms? Chen asked, though she already knew the answer. Unconditional surrender. Your species will serve the Zephyrian Empire as laborers and subjects. Your technology will be integrated into our systems. Your military will be disbanded. Your leaders will be replaced. The slight pause before the last word made it clear what Kextar meant. Behind Chun, she could hear the sharp intake of breath from her crew. The bridge fell silent, except for the hum of failing life support systems and the occasional crackle of damaged equipment. I need time to consult with my government, Chin said. Finally, you have 1 standard hour, Kextar replied. After that, we will begin the final extermination of your species. There will be no further negotiations. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. General Thorne's voice crackled through the communication system from the planet's surface. Sarah, we're barely holding the perimeter. The Zephyrians have broken through our defensive lines in 17 sectors. Civilian evacuations are behind schedule. We need more time. Chen looked at Dr. Webb, who was studying the tactical display with an expression she couldn't quite read. Doctor, please tell me you have something. Anything. Webb straightened, and for the first time in days, Chen saw a hint of a smile cross his face. Actually, Captain, I do. But first, we need to make the Zephyrians believe they've won completely. We need to look utterly defeated. We are utterly defeated, Lieutenant Morrison said from across the bridge, his voice hollow. No, Webb replied, his voice gaining strength. We're exactly where we need to be. The Zephyrians have made the same mistake that countless enemies throughout human history have made. They've assumed that because they can destroy our ships and occupy our planets, they've defeated humanity itself. Chun felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. What are you saying, Doctor? I'm saying that for the past 2 years, while the Zephyrians have been planning this invasion, we've been preparing something they never expected. Not a weapon in the traditional sense, but something far more dangerous to an empire built on the assumption that superior technology equals inevitable victory. Webb moved to the central display, calling up classified files that Chun had never seen before. Captain, what would you say is humanity's greatest strength? Chun thought for a moment. Our adaptability, our refusal to give up. Exactly. And what's our greatest weakness? Our technology is primitive compared to species like the Zephyrians. Wrong, Webb said firmly. Our greatest weakness is that we think like individuals instead of as a collective. We argue, we disagree, we compete with each other. The Zephyrians see this as a fatal flaw because their entire civilization is built on absolute hierarchy and unquestioning obedience. Chin frowned. How is that relevant to our current situation? Because, Webb continued, they don't understand that our apparent weakness is actually our strength. They've spent so much time studying our military capabilities that they've completely ignored our social and psychological capabilities. They think they know how humans will react to total defeat. The communication system crackled to life again. Captain Chun, this is Colonel Martinez from the Titan Defense Platform. We're detecting massive Zephyrian reinforcements entering the system. At least 3 more battle groups. They're not taking any chances. Chun felt her heart sink. 3 more battle groups meant the Zephyrians were bringing enough firepower to glass entire planets. There would be no escape, no last-minute miracle. But Dr. Webb's smile only grew wider. Perfect. The more forces they commit to this system, the better our plan will work. What plan? Chin demanded. Doctor, I need to know what you're talking about. My people are dying out there. Webb looked around the bridge at the assembled crew, then back at Chun. Captain, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. 3 years ago, after our first contact with the Zephyrian Empire, our government began a project unlike anything in human history. We called it Project Phoenix. A weapon project? Morrison asked, leaning forward eagerly. Not a weapon. Something much more powerful. A complete reorganization of how humanity approaches conflict. We've been preparing for this moment, Captain. The moment when we would appear to be completely defeated, when the enemy would celebrate their victory and let their guard down. Chin stared at him. You're telling me that humanity planned to lose this war? I'm telling you that humanity planned to let the Zephyrians think they had won it. There's a difference. Webb's expression grew serious. Captain, I need you to trust me. In the next hour, I need you to make the hardest decision of your career. I need you to surrender to the Zephyrians. The bridge erupted in shocked protest from the crew, but Chin held up a hand for silence. She studied Webb's face, seeing something there that she had learned to trust over their years of working together. Give me one good reason why I should trust you with the lives of every human being in this system, she said quietly. Webb met her gaze without flinching. Because, Captain, the Zephyrians are about to learn what happens when you think you've defeated humanity. They're about to discover that we're not just another species to be conquered. We're something they've never encountered before, a species that gets stronger when it's pushed to the brink of extinction. Chin looked around the bridge at her crew, then out at the stars where the Zephyrian fleet was positioning itself for the final assault. Everything she had been taught about duty, honor, and resistance told her to fight until the end. But something in Webb's voice, some unshakable confidence, made her hesitate. 1 hour, she said finally. You have 1 hour to convince me that surrender is the right choice. Because if you're wrong, Doctor, we'll all be dead or enslaved by tomorrow. Webb nodded solemnly. Captain, by tomorrow the Zephyrians will either be retreating from this system or they'll understand why no one in the galaxy should ever underestimate humanity again. As the bridge crew returned to their duties, Chin couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing at a crossroads in human history. The next hour would determine whether humanity would be remembered as a species that fought bravely but futilely, or as the species that taught the galaxy that apparent defeat could be the first step toward ultimate victory. The stars continued to burn overhead, indifferent to the drama unfolding in their light. But somewhere in the depths of space, humanity's greatest test was about to begin. The secret project the hour that followed Admiral Kekstar's ultimatum felt like the longest in human history. In the depths of the U.S. Defiance, Dr. Marcus Webb led Captain Chun through corridors she had never seen before, past security checkpoints that required clearances she didn't know existed on her own ship. For 2 years, we've been preparing for this moment, Webb explained as they descended toward the ship's most classified section. When our intelligence services first detected Zephyrian scout ships in human space, we knew this day would come. We also knew that conventional warfare would be useless against their technology. They stopped at a massive security door marked with biometric scanners and quantum encryption locks. Webb placed his hand on the scanner, and the door hissed open to reveal a chamber that defied everything Chun thought she knew about her ship. The room was filled with advanced computer systems, holographic displays showing star maps and tactical projections, and screens displaying what appeared to be psychological profiles of various alien species. But what caught Chen's attention immediately was the wall of monitors showing live feeds from every major human colony and military installation. My God, Chen whispered. How long has this been here? Since the ship was built, Webb replied. Captain, meet the real command center of Project Phoenix. Every major human vessel has one of these chambers. Every colony has a hidden installation. Every military base has a secret level that most of the personnel don't know exists. Chun moved to the central display, which showed a three-dimensional map of human space. Red indicators marked Zephyrian fleet positions, while green indicators showed human forces. But there were also blue indicators, far more of them than Chun had expected. What are the blue markers, she asked. Civilian vessels that have been secretly modified over the past 2 years, merchant ships with hidden weapon systems, research vessels with experimental technologies, even passenger liners with capabilities the Zephyrians don't suspect. Webb manipulated the display, and Chin saw that the blue markers vastly outnumbered both the red and green ones. You're telling me that we've been militarizing our civilian fleet in secret? Not militarizing, preparing. There's a difference. Webb's expression grew serious. Captain, I need you to trust me. In the next hour, I need you to make the hardest decision of your career. I need you to surrender to the Zephyrians. The bridge erupted in shocked protests from the crew, but Chin held up a hand for silence. She studied Webb's face, seeing something there that she had learned to trust over their years of working together. Give me one good reason why I should trust you with the lives of every human being in this system, she said quietly. Webb met her gaze without flinching. Because, Captain, the Zephyrians are about to learn what happens when you think you've defeated humanity. They're about to discover that we're not just another species to be conquered. We're something they've never encountered before, a species that gets stronger when it's pushed to the brink of extinction. Chin looked around the bridge at her crew, then out at the stars where the Zephyrian fleet was positioning itself for the final assault. Everything she had been taught about duty, honor, and resistance told her to fight until the end. But something in Webb's voice, some unshakable confidence, made her hesitate. 1 hour, she said finally. You have 1 hour to convince me that surrender is the right choice. Because if you're wrong, Doctor, we'll all be dead or enslaved by tomorrow. Webb nodded solemnly. Captain, by tomorrow the Zephyrians will either be retreating from the system, or they'll understand why no one in the galaxy should ever underestimate humanity again. As the bridge crew returned to their duties, Chin couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing at a crossroads in human history. The next hour would determine whether humanity would be remembered as a species that fought bravely but futilely, or as the species that taught the galaxy that apparent defeat could be the first step toward ultimate victory. The stars continued to burn overhead, indifferent to the drama unfolding in their light. But somewhere in the depths of space, humanity's greatest test was about to begin. Part 2. The secret project the hour that followed Admiral Kekstar's ultimatum felt like the longest in human history. In the depths of the U.S. Defiance, Dr. Marcus Webb led Captain Chun through corridors she had never seen before, past security checkpoints that required clearances she didn't know existed on her own ship. For 2 years, we've been preparing for this moment, Webb explained as they descended toward the ship's most classified section. When our intelligence services first detected Zephyrian scout ships in human space, we knew this day would come. We also knew that conventional warfare would be useless against their technology. They stopped at a massive security door marked with biometric scanners and quantum encryption locks. Webb placed his hand on the scanner, and the door hissed open to reveal a chamber that defied everything Chun thought she knew about her ship. The room was filled with advanced computer systems, holographic displays showing star maps and tactical projections, and screens displaying what appeared to be psychological profiles of various alien species. But what caught Chen's attention immediately was the wall of monitors showing live feeds from every major human colony and military installation. My God, Chen whispered, how long has this been here? Since the ship was built, Webb replied. Captain, meet the real command center of Project Phoenix. Every major human vessel has one of these chambers. Every colony has a hidden installation. Every military base has a secret level that most of the personnel don't know exists. Chun moved to the central display, which showed a three-dimensional map of human space. Red indicators marked Zephyrian fleet positions, while green indicators showed human forces. But there were also blue indicators, far more of them than Chun had expected. What are the blue markers? She asked. Civilian vessels that have been secretly modified over the past 2 years, merchant ships with hidden weapon systems, research vessels with experimental technologies, even passenger liners with capabilities the Zephyrians don't suspect. Webb manipulated the display, and Chin saw that the blue markers vastly outnumbered both the red and green ones. You're telling me that we've been militarizing our civilian fleet in secret? Not militarizing, preparing. There's a difference. Webb brought up another display, this one showing psychological profiles of Zephyrian commanders. Captain, what do you know about Zephyrian military doctrine? Chin studied the profiles, noting the rigid hierarchical structure and emphasis on overwhelming technological superiority. They rely on shock and awe tactics, massive displays of force designed to break enemy morale before the real fighting begins. Exactly. And it works because most species they encounter are impressed by their technology. The Zephyrians have conquered 43 different civilizations using essentially the same strategy each time. Webb highlighted several case studies on the display. They appear with massive force, demonstrate their technological superiority, demand surrender, and then integrate the conquered species into their empire. But it's not working with us, Chin realized. Even after 3 days of losses, human forces are still fighting. Which is why Admiral Kextar has committed so many additional forces to this system. He's confused. In his experience, by now the enemy should have surrendered or been completely destroyed. Instead, humans keep fighting despite impossible odds. Webb brought up a new display showing communication intercepts from the Zephyrian fleet. Our xenolinguists have been monitoring their internal communications. Kextar is under pressure from his superiors to end this conflict quickly. The Zephyrian High Command is becoming concerned that other species might see human resistance as a sign that the Empire can be challenged. Chun felt a chill run down her spine. So, they're going to make an example of us. That's what they think they're doing. But, Captain, they don't understand what they're actually facing. The Zephyrians see our resistance as stubborn defiance. They don't realize it's something much more dangerous. It's human nature. Webb activated another system, and the chamber filled with holographic displays showing human colonies throughout the galaxy. What Chen saw made her gasp. Despite the reports of destruction and defeat, she could see massive underground complexes, hidden installations, and secret research facilities that the Zephyrians had never detected. This is impossible, she breathed. How did we build all of this without them knowing? By using their own assumptions against them. The Zephyrians expected humans to react like every other species they've conquered, focusing all our resources on military defenses and obvious targets. Instead, we spent 2 years creating a completely parallel infrastructure. Webb zoomed in on one of the installations, showing massive manufacturing facilities built deep underground. While they were watching our surface cities and military bases, we were building an entire civilization beneath their notice. Every human colony has a hidden city. Every military installation has a secret twin. Chin moved closer to the display, studying the incredible scale of what she was seeing. The resources this would require, the coordination, that's the beauty of it, Captain. We didn't need to coordinate in the traditional sense. We just needed to trust human nature. When faced with an existential threat, humans don't just fight, they adapt. They innovate. They find ways to survive that their enemies never expect. A new voice cut through the chamber's hum of electronics. Dr. Webb, we're receiving confirmation from all sectors. Phase 2 is ready to begin. Chin turned to see a woman she didn't recognize, tall, dark-skinned, with the bearing of a military officer, but wearing civilian clothes. Captain Chun, meet Director Angela Santos, head of Project Phoenix Operations. Santos nodded respectfully. Captain, I apologize for the deception, but security protocols required that you not be informed of our preparations until absolutely necessary. What's Phase 2? Chin asked, though she was beginning to understand that everything she thought she knew about the war was wrong. The revelation, Santos replied. For 3 days, we've allowed the Zephyrians to believe they were fighting the real human military. What they've actually been fighting is about 20% of our true capabilities. Webb brought up another display, this one showing the real size of the human fleet. Chen's jaw dropped. The number of ships was staggering, easily 3 times what she had believed existed. Where did all these ships come from, she demanded. From human ingenuity, Santos replied. When we realized we couldn't match Zephyrian technology, we decided to match their numbers instead. While they were building a few massive, technologically advanced vessels, we were building hundreds of smaller, more maneuverable ships. But our industrial capacity was never what the Zephyrians thought it was, Webb interrupted. Captain, they've been watching us for 3 years. They know everything about our official military production facilities. What they don't know is that we've been building ships in asteroid mines, in deep space construction platforms, in facilities hidden inside gas giant atmospheres. Chin sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what she was learning. Why wasn't I told? Why wasn't any of this shared with the fleet commanders? Because, Santos said gently, we needed the Zephyrians to see genuine human reactions to defeat. We needed our people to fight with real desperation, to retreat with real fear, to appear genuinely overwhelmed. If our commanders had known the truth, they would have fought differently. You're saying you sacrificed thousands of lives for the sake of deception? Webb's expression grew somber. Captain, we sacrificed thousands to save billions. Every human who died in the past 3 days died, believing they were fighting for humanity's survival. They weren't wrong. They were just fighting a different kind of battle than they realized. Santos activated the communication system. All stations, this is Phoenix Control. Initiate Phase 2. Authorization Santo 77 Alpha. Across the chamber, displays began showing new activity throughout human space. The hidden installations were coming online, the secret fleets were moving into position, and the underground cities were opening their concealed launch bays. Captain Santos said, in about 30 minutes, Admiral Kextar is going to receive a very unpleasant surprise. Instead of accepting humanity's surrender, he's going to discover that the species he thought he had defeated has been quietly surrounding his entire fleet. Chin stared at the tactical display, watching as hundreds of new contacts appeared on the sensors. This is incredible, but will it be enough? The Zephyrians still have superior technology. Which brings us to Phase 3, Webb said with a smile. Captain, what would you say is the most important difference between human and Zephyrian military thinking? Chin thought for a moment. They rely on hierarchy and central command. We're more flexible, more adaptable. Exactly. And that difference is about to become very important. The Zephyrians are expecting us to attack their fleet directly, to try to match their firepower with our own. Instead, we're going to do something they've never encountered before, which is, we're going to ignore their fleet entirely, Santos said. While Admiral Kextar has been focusing on conquering human space, we've been quietly mapping every Zephyrian installation, every supply route, every communication relay in this sector of the galaxy. Webb brought up a new display showing Zephyrian space in unprecedented detail. For 2 years, our hidden ships have been conducting reconnaissance missions the Zephyrians never detected. We know where their fuel depots are, where their reinforcement fleets are stationed, where their command centers are located. Chun felt her heart racing as she began to understand. You're not planning to fight their invasion fleet. You're planning to attack their empire directly. While they're celebrating their victory over humanity, Santos confirmed, we're going to hit every critical installation they have within 100 light years of here. Their communications will go dark. Their supply lines will be severed. Their reinforcement fleets will be stranded without fuel. And Admiral Kextar will find himself commanding a fleet that's been cut off from its empire, Webb added. Suddenly, those superior ships won't seem so superior when they can't communicate with their command structure, can't resupply, and can't call for reinforcements. The chamber's communication system crackled to life. Phoenix Control, this is Deep 6. We have confirmation that Zephyrian reinforcements are moving into final position. All hidden fleet elements report ready for Phase 3 initiation. Santos looked at Captain Chun. Captain, in about 15 minutes, you're going to receive a surrender demand from Admiral Kextar. I need you to accept it. What? Accept the surrender. Allow Zephyrian forces to begin landing on New Terra. Let them think they've won completely. Because while they're celebrating their victory, we're going to show them what happens when you underestimate humanity. Chin stared at the displays showing the massive scope of Project Phoenix. Everything she had believed about the war, about humanity's chances, about their capabilities had been wrong. The question now was whether this incredible deception would be enough to turn the tide. Director Santos, she said finally, I have one question. What happens if this plan fails? What happens if the Zephyrians are able to adapt to our tactics? Santos smiled, and for the first time, Chin saw something in her expression that reminded her of humanity's long history of surviving impossible odds. Captain Santos replied, then we move to Phase 4, and Phase 5, and Phase 6, because the one thing the Zephyrians haven't learned about humanity is that we never run out of phases. The final weapon the moment came precisely as Director Santos had predicted. Admiral Kextar's image filled the main screen of the UES Defiance, his crystalline features reflecting the lights of his command bridge in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. Behind him, Chun could see Zephyrian officers monitoring displays that showed the apparent complete destruction of human resistance. Captain Chun, Kextar began, his translated voice carrying absolute authority. Your hour has expired. I trust you. Have reached the only logical conclusion. Chin stood at attention, her face carefully composed to show the weight of defeat. Around her, the bridge crew maintained expressions of resignation and despair that weren't entirely feigned. Admiral Kextar, I have consulted with what remains of human leadership. We surrender unconditionally. The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she could see Dr. Webb nodding slightly from his position at the rear of the bridge. Somewhere in the hidden depths of the ship, Project Phoenix was moving into its final phase. A wise decision, Kextar replied, and Chin could hear what might have been satisfaction in his voice. You will order all human forces to stand down immediately. Any resistance will be met with complete extermination. Understood. I'm transmitting stand-down orders to all human forces now. Chun nodded to her communications officer, who began broadcasting the surrender message across all human military frequencies. To anyone listening, it would sound like the end of human resistance, but in the hidden command center far below, Director Santos was watching as hundreds of previously invisible human ships began moving into position around not just the Zephyrian fleet, but around Zephyrian installations throughout the sector. Excellent, Kextar said, his attention already shifting to the logistics of occupation. My forces will begin landing on your colonies within the hour. Your military installations will be secured, and your population will be processed for integration into the Empire. As the transmission ended, Chin felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Despite knowing about Project Phoenix, despite understanding the greater plan, she was still ordering the surrender of her species. If Webb and Santos were wrong, if their incredible gamble failed, then humanity would face slavery or extinction. Captain Torres called from the communication station. I'm receiving coded transmissions from the Phoenix network. All hidden assets report ready for Phase 3. Chin nodded, then activated the ship's internal communication system. All hands, this is the captain. In a few minutes, you're going to see things that will challenge everything you thought you knew about this war. I need you to trust in humanity's ability to adapt, to survive, and to fight back against impossible odds. 15 minutes later, the first Zephyrian troop transports began their descent toward New Terra. Chun watched on the main screen as the massive crystalline ships moved through the atmosphere, their alien designs glinting in the sunlight. On the surface, she could see General Thorne's forces laying down their weapons as ordered. Phase 3 initiated, came Santos's voice through the secure communication channel. All hidden fleet elements moving to attack positions. Deep strike teams report ready for simultaneous assault on Zephyrian infrastructure. What happened next would be remembered as the most audacious military operation in human history. While Admiral Kekstar's attention was focused on the occupation of human colonies, hundreds of previously invisible human ships emerged from asteroid fields, gas giant atmospheres, and deep space, hiding places throughout Zephyrian territory. The attacks began simultaneously across a front spanning 50 light-years. Zephyrian communication relays went dark as small, fast human ships armed with specialized weapons struck with surgical precision. Supply depots that had serviced the Zephyrian fleet for decades were destroyed in coordinated strikes that the Empire's sensors barely detected until it was too late. But the most devastating attacks were yet to come. Dr. Webb's analysis of Zephyrian psychology had identified a critical weakness in their military structure: their absolute dependence on central command and control. Unlike human forces, which could operate independently when necessary, Zephyrian units required constant communication with their command hierarchy to function effectively. Captain, Torres announced, her voice tight with excitement, "I'm detecting massive communication disruption throughout the Zephyrian fleet. They're trying to contact their command structure, but all their long-range relays are down." On the main screen, Chin could see the change beginning. The precise formations of Zephyrian ships started to waver as individual commanders found themselves unable to communicate with their superiors. The absolute confidence that had characterized their actions began to falter. "Bridge to Phoenix Control," Chin said into her secure communicator. "Status report. Phase 3 proceeding according to plan," Santos replied. "We've eliminated 73% of Zephyrian communication infrastructure and 41% of their supply network. Their reinforcement fleets are stranded without fuel, and their command centers are operating in complete isolation." But Admiral Kekstar was not a fool. Despite his dependence on technological superiority, he was an experienced commander who had conquered dozens of star systems. As reports of the attacks reached his flagship, Chun could see his crystalline features hardening with realization. "Captain Chun," his voice cut through the bridge's activity as he re-established communication, "what deception is this? Our sensors are detecting massive human fleet movements throughout the sector." Chun straightened, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to smile. "No deception admitted. Just humanity showing you what we're really capable of. Impossible. We destroyed your fleets. We monitored your industrial capacity. You cannot have the resources for such an operation." "You monitored what we wanted you to monitor," Chin replied. "Admiral, you made the same mistake that many others have made throughout human history. You assumed that because you could see our obvious preparations, you were seeing all of our preparations." On the tactical display, the true scope of Project Phoenix was becoming clear. The Zephyrian fleet, which had seemed so overwhelmingly powerful just hours before, was now isolated and cut off from the empire that supported it. Their technological advantages were meaningless without the infrastructure to maintain them. "Dr. Webb," Chin called, "would you like to explain to the Admiral what he's facing?" Webb stepped forward, his earlier nervousness replaced by quiet confidence. "Admiral Kekstar, your empire has conquered 43 civilizations using the same basic strategy. You rely on technological superiority to create shock and awe, then use that psychological advantage to force surrender before significant resistance can develop. Your primitive psychological theories are irrelevant," Kekstar replied, but Chin could hear uncertainty in his voice. "On the contrary, they're extremely relevant. You see, Admiral, humans have been studying warfare for thousands of years. We've learned that the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the best weapons, it's the one who understands that war is ultimately about will, not technology." Webb manipulated the tactical display, showing the Zephyrian fleet's increasingly desperate situation. Right now, your ships are powerful but isolated. Your crews are trained to follow orders from a central command structure that no longer exists. Your warriors are brave, but they've never faced an enemy that refused to be intimidated by superior technology. You are still outnumbered, Kextar protested. Our individual ships are still superior to yours. Are they? Chin asked. Lieutenant Morrison, please show the Admiral what we've been working on. Morrison's fingers flew across his console, and suddenly the space around the Zephyrian fleet was filled with small, fast-moving objects. At first, they looked like debris or asteroids, but as they moved closer, their true nature became clear. Swarm fighters, Morrison announced. Unmanned, highly maneuverable, equipped with adaptive AI that learns from each encounter. We've been testing them in secret for 18 months. The swarm fighters moved unlike anything the Zephyrians had encountered before. Instead of the predictable formations they expected, the small craft moved in constantly shifting patterns, each one reacting to the others in real time. They were like a flock of birds, but each bird was armed with weapons designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in Zephyrian technology. This is impossible, Kextar said, but Chun could see doubt creeping into his crystalline features. No species has ever successfully challenged the Empire's technological supremacy. That's because no species has ever been human, Chin replied. Admiral, you've been thinking about this conflict all wrong. You assume that because our technology is less advanced, we would fight like a less advanced species. But human warfare isn't about having the best weapons. It's about using whatever weapons you have in ways your enemy never expects. As if to prove her point, the swarm fighters began executing attack patterns that defied Zephyrian understanding. Instead of attacking the enemy's ships directly, they targeted the spaces between them, creating interference fields that disrupted the crystal-based communication systems the Zephyrians used to coordinate their vessels. Impossible, Kextar breathed, watching as his fleet's perfect coordination began to break down. Ships that had moved as one entity for decades suddenly found themselves operating in isolation, their commanders forced to make independent decisions for the first time in their careers. Dr. Webb, Chin said, please explain to the Admiral what he's witnessing. Webb stepped closer to the communication screen, his expression serious but confident. Admiral, what you're seeing is the result of 2 years of intensive study of Zephyrian psychology and technology. We learned that your entire military doctrine is based on absolute hierarchy and technological dependence. Your ships are incredibly advanced, but they're designed to work as part of a unified network. On the tactical display, the effects of the human strategy were becoming increasingly clear. Zephyrian ships that had moved with mechanical precision were now drifting slightly out of formation, their commanders uncertain how to proceed without constant guidance from their superiors. We also learned something else. Webb continued, your species has never developed the concept of improvisation. Every Zephyrian military manual we captured contained detailed procedures for specific situations, but no guidelines for dealing with the unexpected. Our procedures are comprehensive, Kextar protested, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. For dealing with species that fight conventionally, yes, but humans have never been conventional. Chun gestured to the tactical display, where the swarm fighters were now moving in patterns that seemed almost organic. Admiral, every one of those fighters is controlled by an artificial intelligence that was trained by studying human fighter pilots. Not just their techniques, but their thought patterns, their tendency to take calculated risks, their ability to adapt to changing circumstances in real time. As they spoke, reports continued to flow in from across the sector. Zephyrian supply lines were in chaos, their communication networks were down, and their reinforcement fleets were stranded without fuel. But more importantly, the psychological impact was beginning to show. Zephyrian commanders who had never faced uncertainty were now forced to make decisions without guidance, and their rigid training had not prepared them for such flexibility. You cannot sustain this level of operation, Kextar said, but Chun could hear desperation creeping into his voice. Your resources are limited. Your technology is inferior. Eventually, you will exhaust yourselves. Will we? Director Santos's voice cut through the communication as she joined the conversation from the Phoenix Command Center. Admiral, let me share some numbers with you. Over the past 2 years, humanity has built more ships, trained more pilots, and developed more weapons than in our entire previous history combined. Santos activated a new display showing the true extent of human preparations. We have shipyards hidden in asteroid belts that can produce fighters faster than you can destroy them. We have training facilities in deep space that have been preparing pilots for exactly this scenario. We have research stations that have been developing new technologies specifically designed to counter your advantages. The revelation was staggering. What the Zephyrians had taken for humanity's entire military capacity was revealed to be merely the tip of an iceberg. Underground factories, hidden research facilities, secret training camps, all had been working around the clock to prepare for this moment. But the most important thing we developed, Santos continued, wasn't a weapon or a ship. It was a new way of thinking about warfare. We studied every conflict in human history, every successful resistance movement, every time a technologically inferior force defeated a superior enemy. Chin picked up the explanation. What we learned, Admiral, is that the most powerful weapon in any conflict isn't technology, it's the willingness to keep fighting when logic says you should surrender. It's the ability to adapt when your original plans fail. It's the refusal to accept that superior technology means inevitable defeat. As if summoned by her words, new contacts began appearing on the sensors. Not ships this time, but something far more dangerous to the Zephyrian mindset: civilian vessels. Merchant ships, passenger liners, research vessels, mining platforms, all moving toward the battle zone with purpose and determination. What is this? Kextar demanded, staring at the display in confusion. This is what you never understood about humanity, Chin replied. When we're threatened, we don't just rely on our military. Every human becomes a warrior. Every ship becomes a weapon. Every civilian becomes a soldier. Lieutenant Morrison was monitoring the communications from the approaching civilian fleet, and his voice carried a note of awe. Captain, I'm receiving transmissions from ships throughout the sector. Cargo haulers that have been secretly armed. Passenger liners that have been converted to troop transports. Mining vessels that have been equipped with military-grade shields. They're volunteers, Dr. Webb added, his voice thick with emotion. Every ship out there is crewed by volunteers who heard about the invasion and decided to help. No orders, no conscription, just humans doing what humans do when their survival is threatened. The sight of the civilian fleet approaching the battle zone seemed to break something in Admiral Kextar's composure. For the first time since the war began, the Zephyrian commander appeared genuinely shaken. This is not how civilized species conduct warfare, he said, his voice barely controlled. No, Chin agreed. This is how humans conduct warfare. And, Admiral, this is just the beginning. Right now, across human space, millions of people are preparing to resist your occupation. Not trained soldiers, ordinary citizens who refuse to accept conquest. Your resistance will be crushed, Kextar said, but the conviction was gone from his voice. Will it? You've been fighting us for 3 days, and every hour reveals new capabilities you didn't know we possessed. How long do you think it will take before your own people begin to question whether conquering humanity is worth the cost? Santos provided the answer. Admiral, our intelligence services have been monitoring communications in Zephyrian space. Your high command is already expressing concern about the resources being committed to this campaign. Other species in your empire are beginning to wonder if rebellion is possible. The truth was devastating. The Zephyrian Empire's power was based on the perception of invincibility. If humanity could resist successfully, other conquered species might begin to question their own subjugation. The entire foundation of the Empire could begin to crumble. What do you want? Kextar asked finally, the question falling from his lips like an admission of defeat. What we've always wanted, Chin replied, to be left alone, to live our lives in peace, to explore the galaxy without interference. She paused, studying the alien commander's crystalline features. Admiral, your empire has conquered 43 civilizations. How many of them fought back after they were defeated? None, Kextar admitted. None, because they accepted that superior technology meant inevitable defeat. But humans don't accept that. We never have. Throughout our history, we've fought against superior enemies and found ways to win. Not because we're stronger or smarter, but because we refuse to quit. Dr. Webb stepped forward one final time. Admiral, let me give you a piece of advice from human military history. Never start a war with a species that considers impossible odds to be a personal challenge. The communication screen showed Admiral Kextar sitting in silence, his crystalline form reflecting the lights of his bridge in patterns that seemed somehow dimmer than before. Around him, Chun could see Zephyrian officers monitoring displays that showed the chaos spreading throughout their fleet and empire. What are your terms? Kextar asked finally. Complete withdrawal from human space, Chun replied without hesitation. Immediate cessation of hostilities, recognition of human sovereignty over our claimed territories, and in return, we stop dismantling your empire piece by piece. We allow your stranded fleets to return home. We demonstrate that humans can be allies as well as enemies. The silence stretched for long minutes. Finally, Admiral Kextar straightened in his command chair, and when he spoke, his voice carried a note of something Chun had never heard from a Zephyrian before: respect. Captain Chun, your terms are acceptable. The Zephyrian Empire will withdraw from human space immediately. As the communication ended, the bridge of the U.S. Defiance erupted in cheers. But Chin found herself thinking about the broader implications of what had just occurred. Humanity had not just defended itself, it had announced to the galaxy that some species could not be conquered through technological superiority alone. Captain, Dr. Webb said, quietly, I believe we just changed the balance of power in this sector of the galaxy. Chin nodded, watching as Zephyrian ships began their retreat from human space. Doctor, I think we did more than that. I think we just reminded the galaxy what happens when you underestimate the power of a species that refuses to give up. As the last Zephyrian vessel disappeared into hyperspace, Chen realized that humanity had won more than a military victory. They had proven that the most powerful weapon in the universe wasn't technology or numbers, it was the indomitable human spirit that turned every setback into a setup for comeback, every defeat into a lesson for future victory. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. And more importantly, no enemy would ever again make the mistake of celebrating too early when facing the species that had turned survival into an art form that in the depths of space, the stars continued their eternal dance. But now, they looked down on a sector where the impossible had become possible, where the defeated had become victorious, and where humanity had proven once again that the most dangerous words in any language were, never underestimate a human.